Good evening, ladies and gents. We'd like to welcome you to the American Dream webcast this evening. We're going to be detailing everything you need to know about the changing landscape of immigration and why the EB-5 visa is still one of the best options out there, especially with South Florida as a key investment destination. My name is Simon Brown. I'm a podcast host at MoneyWeb. Amongst things, I will be moderating this evening's panel. And we've got four esteemed guests with us, experts in their fields. Stuart Ferguson, CEO of American Dream. Leon Versfeld, partner and senior immigration attorney at Versfeld and Hugo. We have Chris Immelman, he's head of Pam Golding International. And then last but not least, Sheldon Holcrow, he's CEO, president of Kaleo USA. Before we get into an agenda and the like, gentlemen, if I can ask each of you just to give a brief who your company is. Stuart, let's start with you. A quick overview of American Dream.
Great. Thanks very much, Simon. Yeah, American Dream is a consultancy company. We specifically focus on the EB-5 investment visa as a mechanism for South Africans that are looking to immigrate to the US. I've been involved in EB-5 since around about 2010, and I've been aligned to a regional center right from the inception. So to date, we've helped about 300 odd families to successfully migrate to the US. And then obviously we work with esteemed partners in the various disciplines. So yeah, that's American Dream.
Leon Versfeld, he's joining us from Kansas City, apparently home of a winning sports team. Leon, a bit about Versfeld and Hugo.
Baie dankie. Goeienaand. My name is Leon Versfeld. They do have me speak English here in this country, so I'll just switch over to the English. But my Afrikaans is still as good as it was yesterday when I graduated from the University of Pretoria with my BLC and LLB. For a brief stint, I was an advocate at the High Court of Pretoria. I clerked for the Deputy Judge President. There I came to America over 22 years ago. My practice gravitated from a litigation platform to immigration, and we've been doing immigration now for over 20 years since we got into it. The benefit of doing immigration and where I came in, 9/11 changed the immigration field in America. We went from the INS to 3 different agencies that is under the Department of Homeland Security. Our law firm focuses specifically just on US immigration. And so it is nothing to be dabbled in. These laws and these regulations oftentimes change, and just a little tweak can make a difference with regards to timing of your case and the success of your immigration case. We are based, as Simon said, out of Kansas City, Missouri, the home of the Super Bowl champions. And I look forward in answering the questions that you may have specifically about this immigration benefit. The best immigration benefit is the EB-5 program. Thank you, Simon.
Chris, let's bring you in, head of Pam Golding International. I think everyone in South Africa knows Pam Golding, and frankly, probably everyone in South Africa knows that Pam Golding's been offering offshore options for as long as I can remember as well.
Thank you, Simon. Indeed, yes. I've been running the Pam Golding International for the last 22 years. It's been a lot of fun. In the early days, we were very London-centric. In fact, we had an office in Sloane Street, just off Sloane Square and in London. And we literally sold hundreds of London properties, typically investment properties, buy-to-let properties to South Africans. But the appetite has grown amongst our client base, and now we offer a number of opportunities and investment opportunities, residency opportunities around the world, from buying a villa in Mauritius to getting a EU passport in Portugal, which is sadly coming to an end in the next couple of months, to people wanting to move to the United States. And I'm delighted to be part of this panel tonight. Delighted to work together with Stuart and his company, which we selected because we think they're the best in the field.
Sheldon, you're joining us from Florida itself, where the project we're going to be talking about is based. Give us a bit of highlights on USA.
The highlights USA. So as much as I'm representing Calio from North Florida, Calio is a proudly South African family office with a presence in the United States. At essence, I suppose we manage cross-border and global wealth. The unit here has an integrated banking, wealth advisory, and asset management service geared to discerning South African high net worth families that are looking to relocate to the United States. So 2 offices on the East Coast, 1 in Florida and 1 in New Jersey at this stage.
Gentlemen, thank you and welcome all. Let's get into what we're going to be talking around today. We're going to touch on the changing landscape of general immigration. Leon touched on it there. This is not something that's ever static. There are certainly changes happening, particularly focusing around Europe. We'll touch on that. We'll talk around the EB5 visa, new regulations, and the attractiveness of the visa. South Florida, in particular, as an investment destination. And there's a particular project. We will get into that. We'll have an overview of the project, and we will be taking questions. If you're on the webcast, you're welcome to drop your questions into the Q&A box. We will take them either during the presentation or we will come to them at the end. I don't want to break the flow, but if there's a particular question and it's fitting with where we are, we'll get to it. If we haven't got to your question, it's because we're leaving it for the end. So don't worry if we haven't immediately got it. But let's jump into some of those changes which are happening and which we certainly have been seeing. And Stuart, let's kick off with you first. Start with the global immigration landscape. And we are seeing, I mean, it's a dynamic environment. It's never completely static, but we are seeing some changes, particularly Ireland and Portugal.
Yeah. So, as you know, a lot of the Irish programs and the Portuguese programs the Irish program has closed. The Portuguese program has just been given a very short-term extension for a further 45 days. But I think just generally, a lot of the EU programs will possibly be phased out in 2025. I think we're also seeing some pressure on some of the Caribbean programs. They're coming under a lot of pressure. And that's really mainly because typically those programs are, you would make a donation or you'd invest in a leisure hotel operation and be buying a passport. And there are obviously some concerns around the sort of due diligence that takes place in terms of the easiness and quickness of just simply buying a passport. So I think that just generally the landscape in respect of those that are looking for alternative residency and citizenship programs are in the near future going to become a little bit more scarce. And certainly there's just general enhancement and overhauling of all these various programs in terms of making sure that the right role players are involved. But Chris, maybe you'd like to elaborate a little bit further in terms of that changing landscape, specifically from a European aspect.
Yeah, Stuart, look, the European programs have been under pressure for some time now. I mean, we saw it in Malta, where they made significant changes there. Cyprus, which in fact closed the citizenship program. The Montenegro one, which we had looked at, turned it down. They made some radical changes to it. Just tonight, earlier this evening, we busy, just with a Greek program, where they announced that they're going to make further changes to the Greek program. So these things are all under siege. It's a tricky one. Europe has been grappling with it for a while. The standout has been Portugal, and the reason why that has been is because the guy that started the programs has been head of the EU Commission for residency and citizenship programs for a while now. So he was reluctant to make some changes because it's been good for Portugal. But as you've just mentioned, it's been our mainstay, and it's now come to an end. They've had a few mock charges, so we don't exactly know the dates, but towards the end of June, I spoke to some people last night. Maybe it's going to be another 2 or 3 months, but it's coming to an end. And it's a daunting thing to think about. If you suddenly say to yourself, well, I'm up the creek without a paddle here, and it's challenging. So sadly, that's going to come to an end. But then you got the United States, and it's glaring for me that people will turn to it and say, listen, let's have a look at it. So yeah. It's that's the way it is.
Yeah, and Chris, I think one of the exciting things for us in the EB5 is that the program has recently gone through a major overhaul in March of last year.
Yeah.
It's gone through a number of integrity measures, which Leon will elaborate on further. And for us, it's now been given an extension until 2025. So certainly, it's a nice opportunity for those that are considering a move to the United States, or those that are wanting to educate their kids or give their kids career advancement in the US. Now would be the time to certainly engage with us and get a greater understanding of the EB5 in its current format. And then perhaps, Sheldon, I mean, you're on the ground, you're in Jacksonville, you're sitting in a nice enclave of South African investors that seem to be gravitating towards Jacksonville. But do you want to just give us a bit of a picture in terms of the trends and high net worth individuals and sort of migration trends that you're seeing in your wealth management sphere?
No problem, I can do that. Probably a good place to start. So before we dive into South Africa, or we have a look at Florida specifically, and maybe we end over there, probably worthwhile we zoom out for a minute, just so we can orientate everyone on the call. So we're talking specifically about millionaire migration. So we're talking about dollar millionaires. So this is just separate that from refugee status, separate that from people leaving North Africa in life rafts trying to get to Western Europe. We're talking about millionaire migration. So the first question is, looking at the globe, which countries are millionaires leaving? And the top 3 countries that millionaires are leaving: Russia, China, and India. So I think, Russia is a statement of the obvious. China and India, I see India just overtook China in terms of total population. So that also makes relatively perfect sense that high net worth families in those jurisdictions would look at alternatives. The question then is, if they're leaving Russia, China, India, where do they go to? And the 5 top places that global wealth moves to, top place currently in the 2023 report is United Arab Emirates. I think that's got something to do with tax treatment. You got Australia, you got Singapore, you've got Israel, and rounding out the top 5, you've got the United States. Now, given that we're talking to a South African audience, just the Africa Wealth Report was released probably 2.5 weeks ago. What's important in that, again, we're looking at those individuals with investable wealth of over $1 million. Just take 10 seconds and think, how many people have access to $1 million on the African continent? The last number is 138,000. So that seems like a big number. Let me compare that. There are currently 340,000 dollar millionaires living in New York City. So we're not talking about the state of New York. We're just talking about New York City. So you're looking at 2.5 times the combined number across the whole of Africa. Interestingly, for South Africa, I was involved in this research about 6 years ago, and 6 years ago, that number was 48,000. The report released 3 weeks ago, we're down to 37,000. So there's 10,000 families that have evaporated. I suspect it's one of 2 reasons. It's a number of high net worth families that have looked at alternatives, taking up the plan B and emigrating. And the second reason would be a number of those families that no longer qualify because they were invested in rands, and obviously the currency then depreciating. The slide that you have up, Stuart, more specifically, where do South African families go? We're not exclusively talking about dollar millionaires now. 66% of all those that leave go to one of 3 places. The first is the United Kingdom. I think that's got a lot to do with the ancestral visa. Second place, 200,000 families you've got down in Australia. A big function of that is the skills-based visa that's available to South Africans looking at Australia. And in third place, you've got just over 110,000 that have relocated to the United States. Just quickly, where that data comes from, that's in-country census data. So this is not data out of South Africa. Okay. This is, for example, census data in the United States, so individuals that fill out those forms and identify as South African. That's good.
Great, okay. Perfect.
Let's get on to some around the EB5 visa in of itself. Leon, let's bring you in here. You're the expert on this stuff. Can you talk us around a bit around the overview of the EB5 for those who are saying, never heard of it, or maybe I've heard of it, but I'm not quite up to speed with what the details are?
Yeah, let's talk about it. Thank you so much, Simon. So this is not something that's new. In fact, right at the time when it started, there was always an initial investment of $500,000. And the program was set so that everybody can benefit. Number one, that you would have the United States benefit from an investor investing $500,000 into a targeted employment area where the unemployment is a little bit higher, that 10 jobs needs to be created per investor. And at the end of the day, the investor would have the opportunity to get permanent residency for him and his family. So what has happened when Congress initially initiated this legislation, they have set a sunset of a 4-year timeline because it was quite controversial at the time when it was introduced. In fact, the late Senator Kennedy, had a comment who was a great proponent of immigration, said, "You mean to tell me they're going to sell the Statue of Liberty one brick at a time?" And it had a lot to do with regards to the fact that a lot of people, when they think about EB5, is they have this notion that you're actually buying a green card. This is not buying a green card. This is really kind of investing in an opportunity that benefits the United States by the creation of jobs in an area where it's actually very needed. Now, I think to have an understanding of why the EB5 is beneficial is because you need to understand where everybody kind of gets a benefit out of it. As I mentioned, the US government gets a benefit out of the job creation in a specific area. You get a benefit because you and your family get permanent residency to the United States, and we'll talk about that in a second. And more importantly, the developer who has gone through all of this trouble to go to the United States government and ask them to give them the license to actually attract foreign investors to their project and to get this license, they get a benefit because the return on the investment that they would have in giving back to you may be minimal than what you would otherwise get on the stock exchange. So a lot of people, when they look, and a lot of our clients that we have represented in the past, when they consider EB5, this is something that you do by yourself. You don't need a US employer to sponsor you and be contingent upon that employer's whims, whether or not there's a fluctuation in layoffs, fluctuation in the economy, or whatever the case may be. So you are totally 100% in charge with regards to that. Number two, when you look at the diversifying your investment portfolio, the return on your investment year is really opportunity. And a lot of people understand what that opportunity means, either it be for themselves or for their kids. The majority of the people, as Stuart has alluded to earlier, utilizes this immigration benefits really for their kids. In most cases, and a lot of in South Africa as well, unfortunately, the education system is not of which where everybody gets an equal opportunity to go to the great universities that I graduated from back in the day. And so they go look elsewhere. And the United States is still by far one of the best tertiary educations in the world, which is not just by our standards, but because a lot of international students come to the United States to pursue that opportunity. Now, you would do your child, a great disservice by sending them to the United States, paying an extreme high tuition fee for them to graduate with a university degree from the United States, and not giving him or her the access to opportunities that there would be here for employment. Because how that typically rolls out is you will come over as a student visa. On the student visa, you would need to find a job. Then you need to convince the employer who's willing to give you a job to spend about $5,000 or more to apply for an H-1B visa that is subject to a lottery. There's only 65,000 of these visas available, and there's 300,000 people applying. And at the end of the day, lose these opportunities. So you have then your child with a US degree not having the opportunities that he can gain from continuing his education or his career in the United States. So that's what he wants to do, which is still by far the biggest platform to have a career from. So from an overview point of view, one of the biggest concerns has always been with this 4-year sunset rule, that what happens every 4 years? Well, Congress would set that in place so that just to make sure that this still would work. And so therefore, the longest time here towards the end, we were having, is it going to change? Is it not going to change? Are they going to extend it? Are they not going to extend it? That created quite a lot of anxiety under the $500,000 investment opportunity. Until such time that last year, thank goodness, even through the Trump administrations, where it went up to $900,000 and then it went up to $800,000, we actually now have solid law. The Reform and Integrity Act of 2022 was introduced in March of last year, and it created quite a lot of benefits. More importantly, I think it created great benefits for the investor, more so than anything else, because there's a lot of integrity brought to the program, where a lot of due diligence is being done in addition to what was done before on investment opportunities like the one here in South Florida, where the government would send people out to make sure that this investment is solid, rehash everything that they have done in the past, and make sure that the investor, foreign investor, is protected under that. The other great benefit that this new legislation brought, and I'll talk about that in a second, is it also, based upon a lawsuit that was settled, created an opportunity for flexibility as far as source of funds is concerned. Back in the day, before this lawsuit got settled, you need to have literally about in this case now, $800,000 setting aside in a kitty in order to invest. The new legislation, as well as based upon this lawsuit, has now created an opportunity where you can actually go borrow against your asset. You can even borrow from a friend. It doesn't really matter what the interest rate is. You can even get money gifted to you to utilize for the investment. So with the change of law, it also helped, and it incorporated the integrity. It brought in the source of funds. And then the downside of it, obviously, it went from $500,000 to $800,000. The other upside of it is it brought in an extension, as Stuart mentioned, up until 2025, but not to sunset, only to incrementally increase the minimum investment amount. So this is still a program that will last for quite some time based upon the legislation that's on the books. So we don't necessarily have concerns about that. It created some other opportunities within the EB5 that some other folks are utilizing, but this is still by far the best turnkey option, where you don't need to come up with your own money, creating jobs. And believe it or not, in the United States, trying to find people to come and work is actually extremely difficult. People say, well, I can invest my own money and start my own thing. It's a very difficult task to actually get people employed. The other great benefit with regards to this new legislation, it brought concurrent filing. And what do I mean by concurrent filing? Well, historically, what would happen is you will file your initial application with immigration. It's the form I-526. And then with this application, you would wait, and some would say with no end in sight, you would wait until this I-526 is approved. And then once it's approved, the case will then get sent to the U.S. consulate, and then you and your family will process your application at the U.S. consulate. Well, what this new legislation has done, similar to with other immigrant visas, like if you get married to a U.S. citizen, or if you've got an employer sponsoring you, similar immigrant visas, they've also introduced a concurrent filing, which means that if I have my underlying I-526 application on file, if I am in the United States as a student, as a tourist, someone who's here on an L visa or any other non-immigrant visa, I can now concurrently file what is called an adjustment of status. And what that means is that it now allows me to, with this adjustment of status, remain in the United States beyond the non-immigrant visa timeline. Either it be the 6 month that a tourist visa allows me, but in addition to that, also allows me to file for a work authorization card that is now coming in between 4 and 6 months. I can apply for a travel card, which allows me to travel freely in and out of the United States without needing to go to a consulate. All this while being in the United States, getting integrated, because with a work card comes a social security card, and with a combination of those two and a driver's license, nobody really needs to see your passport or really care where you're from. For all intents and purposes, everybody assumes that you're legal. And so this has created, this is going to be a game changer, because no longer we are now subject to the adjudication of the I-526 that is, seems to take longer and longer and longer. But you can now come to the United States and kind of get settled in. The kids can start school over here, and so on and so forth. So that's been a significant change.
Yeah, I think that the concurrent filing is an absolute deal changer. It really allows us a lot of flexibility when dealing with a family unit and trying to map out a specific timeline in terms of their entry and sort of relocation and settling down in the US. So certainly we're seeing a lot of our current clients that are waiting for adjudication that are now sort of moving forward on doing the concurrent filing and doing an adjustment of status. And I think that going forward, the trend is going to be that a large portion of people that are considering EB5 will without doubt file an R526 and at the same time concurrently file for an adjustment of status. It really is a deal changer and certainly makes the transition to the US a lot more simpler.
Yeah, it makes that whole planning process seemingly a whole lot easier as well. Stuart, let's stay with you for a minute. New rules on source of funds. And I'm not sure, I know that grey listing has added some complexity, but certainly not stopping money moving. That is still flowing nice and easy, but rules on source of funds.
Yeah, so in terms of source of funds, previously we were restricted in terms of, remember, source of funds is one of the underpinning requirements in terms of due diligence on a file that has been adjudicated by immigration. So we tend to spend a lot of time on the due diligence in terms of where the money was derived from, and we trail it right back to origin. It can, in some cases, be quite intrusive, although we try and design mechanisms that are least intrusive for an adjudicator to look at the file. But we are able to use donations. So in some cases, it's family units that are putting together and assisting other family members. So donations can be utilized. Loans can be utilized. Previously, loans were a little bit more difficult, but certainly loans can be facilitated. And then obviously, if you have a family member that is willing to gift you the money, then gifting and donations are totally acceptable in terms of source of funds. But I need to highlight is that there is a lot of due diligence that takes place in respect of the source of funds. We really do need to understand where the money comes from, and we need to have all the supplementary documents to support that application.
Yeah, and that's just a process. I mean, there's nothing we can do around that. That, of course, is where you and your team step in and help. And deferred payments, and what are deferred payments? Help us understand that part of the process.
So deferred payments, not every project has the ability to offer deferred payments. We're very fortunate. We have a project which is nearing completion, what is completed, and we have a small capital raise that we're going to be doing. And we now have the ability to do what's called a deferred payment. And that means that we would be able to file you with immigration with a down payment of $250,000. And then obviously have sight of when the balance of the funds would be in play. We've designed it specifically for the South African market, just because we've now gone up to the 800 threshold, and obviously trying to get $800,000 out of South Africa in one swing is difficult because we've got limits. So yeah, we've got, as I say, we've got a small window of opportunity to place certain investors on a deferred payment scheme. But it is important to note that we need to have sight of where the balance of the funds are going to be coming from. So if it's going to be coming from the sale of a home, the sale of a business, or from a investment portfolio, then that would form part of the supplementary documentation that we would provide to demonstrate to immigration that you are actively involved in ensuring that you have the full 800 in place prior to the file being adjudicated. So
gotcha.
Just
okay, no, that makes sense. Yeah, particularly because, as you say, we have got currency controls in South Africa, and that can create some sticking to it. That's now the EB5 visa, the understanding of how that works, the process there. Let's move on to South Florida itself. Sheldon, let's start with you. You're down there in South Florida, obviously a key growth area in the USA, and an area that's been identified by American Dream as an investment node. Tell us why Florida in particular, and why South Florida? Florida itself is a small and skinny state, but why the South part?
So it's actually not just South Florida, but South Florida tends to be the most popular. So again, let's bring it back to home. You look at South Africa, and I think a combination of the poor report card by some of the state agencies combined with what I think was a COVID hangover. What I realized, a lot of families we're forced into a long, deep rethink around what does the future hold? What does work-life balance mean? What does purpose mean? What are they going to do for the next 2 decades? The same is true in the United States. So US population, I'm guessing, but it's probably around 330, 340 million people. And roughly 5 million Americans move from one state to another every year. That's quite standard. What happened, though, again, because of that COVID hangover, is similar to what you saw in South Africa. So South Africa, you saw what everyone come to term the semigration. Semigration, guys emptying out of some of the big cities up north in Johannesburg and Pretoria and looking for some of the Gulf estates down in the Western Cape. So the same thing happens in the United States. Where did they move from? So most of the movement happened out of areas like California, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and Illinois. And if I say Illinois, just read Chicago. And the question is, where do they go to? Well, they go to KZN, and KZN for Americans is South Florida. For South Africans, they tend to end up in one of 3 places, so not exclusively South Florida. Texas is very popular, and Charlotte, the Carolinas, is also very popular.
Okay. Stuart, let's bring you in here as well. A bit around South Florida. I mean, certainly it's a desirable destination in terms of schools, neighborhoods, medical, even job opportunities. Mentioned earlier, finding people to work for you in the US with a 3.5% unemployment rate is there are jobs galore.
Yep. Also, I think, like Sheldon mentioned, the state of Florida has proven to be a little bit recession-proof. It's got a great South American influence. I mean, the South Americans that flock into the greater Miami area don't go much beyond Miami. They think Miami is the US. And then you've got even the Canadians who will come down specifically to the node that we're developing in their winter months. So it's just a great environment. And yeah, we've been very active in South Florida. It's got great landlord rights, which we enjoy. And then obviously the asset classes that we've traditionally focused on, which are multifamily developments, are exceptionally popular in South Florida. So we've been active there for a long period of time, and it's just an environment that we really enjoy.
Chris, let's bring you in. You're Pam Golding. You've been traveling the world, looking at various different destinations, attractions that you see for the South Florida.
Yeah, I went there with Stuart on more than one occasion to educate myself exactly. It's one thing to say, well, I want this American green card thing, and I want to get into the States and all the rest of it. But where's my cash going, and what's the underpinning investment I've got to make? So I went there and I did a bit of homework myself and saw what it was all about. And I recall being with some guys that actually worked for us here in Cape Town. They were living up in Boston, and they were showing me around Florida in the early days. And they said to me, "Isn't it just great here?" And they picked their phones up and they showed me their phone, and the temperature was 5 degrees in Boston and was 25 degrees in Florida, in Miami. They said, it's hard to resist. And so when you see what's happening down there, you see the lifestyle, what the people like, and so on. And I get exactly what Sheldon was saying about semigration. During COVID, people realized, well, lifestyle is massive. So for all these things that we're looking at, and particularly as Stuart terms in multi-family units and so on, there's an underpin of people coming into Florida, wanting to live there. So there's somebody that's either going to buy a house or is going to rent your house. So the economics for us in the property world makes sense. So not only is it a pretty place and a nice to be, and the weather's great, and lots of golf courses and cycling and all those kind of things that South Africans like. The economy also makes sense. So I like the whole stack here.
If I can just add, so with all of these conversations, naturally there's always going to be what I always term the push and the pull factors. Just quickly, to close on the South Florida piece, some of the pull factors. So South Florida has no state tax. So across the 50 odd states, it's got one of the lowest tax rates, which is very attractive. it's arguably the nicest of the weather next to California, probably the state with the best of the weather. In fact, it's called the Sunshine State, and people move to the Sun Belt. Property prices, you can afford more. Buying 100 square meters in Chicago or New York, it's going to cost you a hell of a lot less. So you can afford bigger homes, and the homes are more affordable. What is attractive to some, particularly the older set that are looking to relocate with young family, relatively conservative, right-leaning government led by Ron DeSantis, and access to, someone's mentioned it earlier, some of the top schools and some of the top universities, not quite Ivy League. The Ivy Leagues are based further up north, but phenomenal universities, low tax rates, and importantly, when you pay your taxes, you can see where it goes: infrastructure, development, schools, bridges, roads, stadiums, the like.
Yeah, you actually get the benefit. And Chris, let's stay with you. Sorry, short in a second. I was asked a question around cost of living in Florida. And I mean, he's saying, is it, in terms of other states? My sense is in America, it's going to depend where you compare to. Now, you've mentioned tax. That's a big deal, of course. But, cost of living in Florida versus New York is going to be different to one of the flyover states, I imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think exactly what Sheldon was just saying now. I mean, you live in New York City. The cost of living in New York City is completely different to what it is. You get more value for your buck for what you're buying. Yeah, because your properties are bigger, the gardens are bigger. There's more lifestyle around it versus what you compare to in something like Chicago or New York City, or some of the places in California. But as to the day-to-day value and living and cost of living, in the States, I'm not that clued up on it, but my sense of it is that it's a good place to live. Yeah.
Sheldon, you must travel around a fair bit in the States. I mean, cost of living, it is a bit of a moving target, depending on exactly where you are and I suppose also how you want to spend. I mean, I can go and buy crazy overpriced coffee here in Joburg, or I can buy reasonable priced coffee.
So, point of departure, as a South African, you sort of got to make peace with the fact that it's probably going to cost double. So that's the starting point. It is more expensive. There's no question. Definitely more expensive, but I do feel the money goes a bit further. So, you don't really, if you're staying in one of the good states and one of the good counties, you don't really you've got access to good medical, you've got access to some phenomenal schools. But yes, it depends, what sort of cars you're driving. Do you have kids at schools? But arguably, yes, we're more expensive the closer you get to the 10 big cities. Just on those, so I mean, we spoke about the net inflows into Florida. So the 10 biggest cities in the States with the highest net inflows, 5 of those are located in Florida, and those are going to be expensive the closer you get to the city. So I'm talking Miami, Tampa, and Fort Lauderdale.
Okay, let's move on to the action. I'm seeing some questions, Suzanne. Others, we'll get to those at the end. We'll pick up some as we go through. But let's look at 1818 Park itself, which is a development we are particularly talking around at this point. Stuart, this is one of the key developments on your radar. Is this 1818 Park in South Florida? And I know that you're keen to share with investors. It is complete, which is important. This isn't something which is still in plans and a building site, etc. And got really great occupancies. You can share some insights around the project.
Yes, thanks, Simon. So 1818 is located in the city of Hollywood. So just to orientate the viewers, Hollywood is 4 miles from Fort Lauderdale and roughly around about 20 miles from Miami. It's in the city of Hollywood. We've been very active in the city of Hollywood for a number of years. A couple of years ago, we completed a relatively large building across the road known as Hollywood Circle, which was a $240 million capex project, which was 400 condos, a hotel, and quite an extensive ground floor retail. And then we commenced with the construction of 1818, which is a pure residential rental stock building. So these apartments have not been sold. They have been developed for leasing out. And we developed it during COVID. So we were very blessed that during COVID, we had no construction delays. And it was completed, and we've had a phenomenal leasing up. We're currently sitting at about 95% leased, and achieving exceptionally good rate per square foot, far more than what was originally projected. I think from an EB5 perspective, what makes this project very unique is that the jobs have already been created. So when one looks at an EB5 opportunity, you're typically going to be getting into the project prior to commencing with construction, because the developers would be utilizing EB5 cash or EB5 investments towards their capital stack to utilize for construction purposes. And then obviously they would need to make sure that they are going to support the job creation that is required for the immigration benefit. In this case, we generated just over 1,600 jobs, which technically means we could have had 160 investors subscribe. But in fact, to date, we've only had 77 South African investors invest. Means we've got a great job buffer, which is important from a EB5 immigration aspect in terms of adjudication. And then I think more importantly for an investor, the risk component or the developmental risk component has been eliminated. And this building is now heading into a nice stabilized environment. The construction loan has been taken out. It's been replaced with a commercial loan with Deutsche Bank. And it's always good to know who the bank is and who is in a first preference position. So where you've got the likes of Deutsche Bank, obviously they do a lot of their due diligence in respect of providing a building of this nature with a mortgage. And from a gearing aspect here, we're just short of a 50% loan to value. So it provides certain elements of capital security for investors that are wanting that from the EB5 investment. And then obviously it has multiple exit strategies. It is probably our intention with this specific building, once it stabilizes, that it will go on the open market and sell. That will probably happen when rates start to dip down and cap rates start to improve. But yeah, we've been very active in the City of Hollywood, got a great relationship with the City Redevelopment Agency, and we do have a number of other developments which are in the pipeline that don't necessarily blend themselves to an EB5, but we're very, very active in this node, and it's something that we know quite well. But this is the one that we've got some limited opportunities in terms of those who would like to take advantage of a deferred payment scheme, or those that would like to subscribe and ensure that they are ready for adjudication.
Chris, if I could bring you in with your property expert eye. First part of the question is it seems to have been massively popular with South Africans and investors. I mean, what stands out for you as the property expert?
I think what stands out is firstly what I liked when I first got involved here is who the developers were. So for us, that's key. Who are the developers? Do they have the wherewithal and the expertise and the knowledge and the balance sheet to follow through and to complete what they started? They've done that beautifully here. I think this entire project is from our point of view de-risked in as much as it's built, it's there. It's 97% let, which is completely unheard of. It's crazy. We don't have these large buildings that are tenanted. Typically in South Africa, the building like this will be sectional titled and be owned by individual owners. And to have something like this on your balance sheet with so much, the occupancy so high is really, really good. So from our point of view, for us to say to one of our clients to say they want to go the EB5 route, this is a good one. The reason why it's good is because it's already built. The jobs have already been created, because as Stuart was explaining earlier, that the whole purpose of the EB5 program is to create jobs, to help them create jobs in areas where they need jobs to be created. And in this case, and you always wonder, well, is the developer able to deliver and do that? In this case, it's already done. So we take comfort from that, and that's why we like this particular development.
Yeah,
I've seen it. I've walked through it. Stuart has taken me in and outside the building, so I've seen the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, Leon, that was the point you were making earlier around starting a business might sound easy, but truthfully, in the US, there's challenges, and the challenge is that 3.5% unemployment. I hadn't realized in the case of this, you can essentially bank those jobs, and the credit is now there for prospective investors.
Yeah, absolutely correct. I mean, that is one of the great benefits. And there's also, just a side point that I think was mentioned earlier, there's not a lot of developers out there that are actually doing this down payment plan. I mean, a lot of these guys actually need cash, and they need cash right now to get that building out of the ground. So you may not necessarily see other projects that does have these down payments where you can kind of start investing, because the law says you must have invested or in the process of investing. And so with this, in the process of investing, it's some great opportunities in order to get into a program like this. And immediately, if you're here, do an adjustment of status.
Okay, I want to get to Q&A. We're coming up with time. We've got a bunch of questions coming through, so let's start taking some of those questions. Just a quick announcement: American Dream is going to be doing a series of events: Durban, Johannesburg, Cape Town. You can reach out and make an appointment, get the process started. We will be sharing contacts. There's an email address that's gone through and the like. So if we don't get you a question, or if you wake up suddenly tomorrow morning and thought, I had a question, I need it answered, or perhaps you want to chat with one of the consultants, certainly reach out. But a fair bunch of questions coming through at this point. Suzanne, Chris, I'm going to jump to you first. Suzanne's asking, we were talking around the EU situation in Europe in particular, and the end of those golden visas we've been seeing. Sort of any forecast of EU passport eligibility for residents? I mean, my sense is it is just getting tougher and tougher in Europe across the board.
It's good. It's getting tougher. It's getting tougher across the board. There's no question about that. We're seeing it. That pushback is coming from the European Union, not necessarily from the individual countries, and we're seeing that. So, as I was saying, in one of the, when we started off on the webinar earlier this evening, I was saying that we're going to find ourselves in a situation where Europe is locked out and you can't get into Europe anymore. Thankfully, I think the second part of the question is we are seeing in Portugal that the people have gone over the line from residency to citizenship. So that's given us some comfort, because that's the end goal for a lot of people. So obviously we like that, but I'm afraid that whole program is under a lot of pressure, and I honestly don't see it around for many more years.
The question coming through, and I'm going to throw it to you, Stuart. We talk about the benefits of the EB5 compared to golden visas and the like. I mean, we've talked around the structure of the EB5. I mean, one of the key benefits is, as you've mentioned, it's South Florida, it's the United States, which is a hugely desirable destination for the South African diaspora. But of course, the other key one, as Chris has just been saying, is that in this day and age, Europe is sort of closing itself off, and the US is not, and that's critically important. And you've got the expertise there to assist people.
Yeah, Simon, what I'd also like to just mention is that typically the European programs have been, or other residency programs like Mauritius, are linked to property ownership. So you've got to retain the property ownership to retain residency. EB5 is slightly different. Whilst it's labeled as an EB5 investment visa, it's really around job creation. So long as we've demonstrated that the jobs have been created, your money goes into the project, the jobs are created, and your money comes back out. So that's, you're not tied for eternity to an ownership structure. It's not an ownership structure. It's a participation in a project that is directly or indirectly creating jobs. And I think that's a fundamental difference. So if you're investing with a solid project, then there should be the likelihood that your capital should pop out once you have completed your immigration cycle, and once the developers have stabilized the building and designed an exit strategy that makes economical sense for themselves and for the investors. So I think that's a very important point to differentiate between maybe some of the European programs and the EB5 specifically.
Leon, if I can bring you back in, are there restrictions on what sort of entities? We're talking property this evening. We're talking particularly South Florida, 1818 Park. And we've touched on the challenges of starting a business in the US, most notably, employment, but broadly the challenges there. Are there other industries, are there restrictions in the EB5 visa, Leon?
I wouldn't say that there is necessarily restrictions. Depending, I guess, on what kind of nefarious project you want to tackle. But I think as a prudent investor, you obviously want to evaluate the risk element that goes into these kind of processes is, can I get my capital back? And so for the reason why most of these EB5 projects are tied to a property is just because that's kind of the safest way. There's a brick and mortar. But to answer your question, no, there's been some ski resorts that didn't quite make it. There's been a milk farm in Idaho that didn't quite make it. So I think at the end of the day, when you consider EB5, there's just two questions. Can I get a green card and can I get my money back?
Yeah. And there's a question now that's just come through a moment ago from Andre, and he's asking in terms of funds at risk. And I'm going to read it out because I'm not 100% sure what he's asking. Andre, if we get it wrong, repost the question. What happens when the development is completed before the EB5 application has been adjudicated, which is what we've seen in this scenario, as I understand, funds at risk pending the application? Does one need to reinvest? My sense is no, you've invested, the jobs are created. There's not a sense of now you need to lock in, or is there some restriction there?
So when we file, we allocate the jobs to you. So in our case, we would be filing you and we would be allocating jobs that have already been created.
Gotcha.
His funds do need to still remain until he is adjudicated and completed certain immigration criteria. But yeah, he doesn't run the risk of being anxious about whether the jobs were created or whether he was the last guy that subscribed, maybe scraping the barrel in terms of the job creation, because the developers have taken full advantage of raising as much equity as they can because they've got a big job creation number. So
yeah, and those jobs are credited in the bank in a sense.
Correct.
Can I maybe just quickly say one more thing? I think just to Andre's question, I think from the reinvestment portion of things, as the thing kind of goes along, is my money still at risk? I think that is kind of comes with the due diligence package that you get to have an understanding as an investor. What is that risk that you have when you do it? Is it in the development cycle? Is it in the operation? So when you ask whether or not, the risk element, that will be in your due diligence package that you evaluate as an investor when you go into this deal.
Gotcha. No, 100%. Great question coming through. Is there an age limit for children as part of the family going over to the US on an EB5?
Yes. So you can capture the family unit, all kids under 21. And we've had quite a few filings that we had done right before someone turned 21. So as long as I get your application filed before your child turns 21, there is something called the Child Status Protection Act that will basically freeze that child's age for as long as the application takes, and then once it pops out on the other end, they will start aging again.
And okay, some we need that more at the old age rather than the young age. But I take your point, and that then would give the kids the full green card as well, with full access to the US.
Yes,
they are now
absolutely.
Americans.
Yeah. And once they're green card holder, then green card holder age no longer then matters.
Yeah.
Simon, on the other side of the band is that there's no age restriction in terms of what the age of a principal applicant can be. So you can be
good point.
86 years old, and it's not going to discriminate against your eligibility. I think the other important one is that medicals, obviously medicals are a criteria, but they're relatively lenient. So if you've got any chronic illnesses or things like that, it's not going to make you ineligible. So it's not as difficult as some of the other countries in terms of
they realize that as we get older, we age a little bit, and, and our bodies start to creak.
A lot more ailments.
I've got a sore muscle today because I did something silly, and the only thing I can think of is because I'm old, and I'm not even that old yet. A great question coming through. Repayment of your funds dependent on selling the property? If so, exit cap rate, would that need to be? Let's talk around the exiting. At some point, someone moves over, they've got their green card. They love Florida, but they decide they want to move to Kansas, perhaps, because that's where the sports teams are. What is that process and requirements there?
Yeah. So remember, typically our projects have got what we call multiple exit strategies, so that we're not tied to just one. So in the case of Block 40, it's either just the orderly sale of that property at the appropriate time, and the appropriate time is when the valuation makes sense to the developers. The cap rate is at a certain point, and interest rates are where we've got an abundance of buyers that are looking for the property. The alternative would be that we could sell those units off it's unlikely that that will be the exit strategy on that project, just because to open up what we know as a sectional title register here, give tenants notice, and try and sell 200 odd units would most probably delay the return of capital by about 2 years. Or there's a possibility that because we own a number of buildings in that precinct, that we would bundle them and offload them to a REIT. But obviously, it's all about timing. So, but those are discussions that we typically have with the investors on a one-on-one as they understand what it is that they are potentially going to be participating with.
Yeah, that's an important point, and I'll say it again. There are some upcoming roadshows. You can get personalized one-on-one sessions. The contact emails have also been dropped for the folks into the chat. You can touch on that. Another great question coming through. Is this only for South Africans? And the person asking the question, I don't see a name, saying, I'm Kenyan.
No, Kenya's a great market. We're very active in Kenya. So we are planning to come to Kenya. I love Kenya. I love going to the Masai Mara and the Serengeti. So no, we've got a lot of Kenyan investors. So yeah, no, we've done a number of Kenyan investors. So we are planning to be coming to Kenya. And we're also planning a trip to the UAE, which is now becoming quite a nice emerging market for us. So please reach out to us. I've got a number of investors that we've subscribed out of Kenya.
Folks, we're heading up against time. We've seemed to have got through all of the questions. A quick closing, and I'm going to go to Sheldon, because you are the person who's currently sitting in South Florida in the glorious weather. Although here in Joburg, winter has so far been delayed. Touch wood. I'm off to the coast for the weekend because I do not like winters at all. Sheldon, when it comes back to the US is a big place, but there's a lot of benefit to South Florida, and it's issues that you touched on. It's things such as tax, it's things such as climate, such as opportunity around education and employment. I mean, it is a booming state.
Absolutely booming state. More than that, I think just access to. So within a couple of hours drive of where I am, I can pop down to Miami, South Beach, Miami-Dade. I can go and watch NASA launch the rockets on the weekend and see what they're up to. My kid turns 9 and I can head across, and it's an hour's drive to Disneyland. I can go and watch Daytona 500 and take the boys to the track. There's 260 days of sunshine, low tax rates, extremely low crime rates, and phenomenal schools. I mean, what's not to love? Everything you see, for everyone else, they've had to use fancy postcards as their backdrops. I don't have to use a postcard. This is where I live.
Yeah, okay, don't rub it in. Leon, quickly closing remarks from you. I mean, one of the things is complexity. You were talking about I-526s and 485s and the like, but that's where you come in. You're gonna that is your area of expertise, and I don't have to stress myself with knowing the ins and outs of the rules and the like. That's what you and your team are doing out of Kansas.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it really doesn't matter where we are located. The federal government has everybody who applies for this benefit file at a central location. I could just maybe finish off with 2 things. I think, again, as you consider EB5, 2 things. Can I get a green card for me and my family, my spouse and kids under 21, and my money back? Number 1. There's no age restriction, as Stuart mentioned, for the principal investor.
Yeah.
You can get your spouse and kids under 21. There's no medical thing other than making sure you got your shots. No education, no language requirement like some of these other stuff has. And I think at the end of the day, most important, you don't need to live in Florida. There's some other places. Just because you invest in Florida doesn't mean you need to go live over.
You're singing the praises of Kansas. Chris, let's bring you in. Pam Golding International. You've been in this for 22 years. You say you've been down to Florida, and it is a great destination.
It is indeed. I like it. I'm happy to punch it. I was with, we went with Stuart to several destinations. We did some stuff in Chicago. We did some stuff in New York City. And now we're doing some stuff in Florida. I think it's our second one we're doing in Florida. I like it a lot. So I say, I keep on saying exactly what Leon touched on now is as important as getting the green card is making sure you got to get your cash back. And where you're going to invest here in South Florida, the underpin for your investment is really good. So big tick from me.
Stuart Ferguson, CEO American Dream, last closing remarks to you. I mean, this is what you and your team here do. This is your area of expertise.
This is what we do 24/7, 7 days a week. So we literally hold an investor's hand from the day that they are considering it to hopefully the day they exit it. I think we pride ourselves that we've got a 100% success rate. We've never, ever had a single decline. Certainly on the projects that we've been involved in, we've never, ever had a capital failure. Immigration is not for the faint-hearted. And as smooth as we've said the EB5 process is, it does have its hicks. But, you know, we surrounded ourselves with the correct people. We've got the likes of Leon and other immigration attorneys that we work throughout the US. And then obviously we've got strategic partners like Calio Capital who help with understanding tax consequences, externalizing the funds on our clients' behalf. And then, I mean, Chris and PGR are just great people to work with. And, you know, Chris and myself are going to be on quite an extensive roadshow engaging with investors that are looking to consider an EB5.
We'll leave it there, gentlemen. Stuart, Leon, Chris, Sheldon, appreciate the time. Ladies and gents who were attending and watching, we appreciate your time this evening. As Stuart said there are going to be roadshows. There are contact details in the chat. We will also send out a mailer, a follow-up email with links to the video. We have recorded this so you can rewatch. If you've got questions, easiest way to get those resolved is reach out, ask the questions. Ladies and gents, appreciate your time. Gentlemen on the panel, thanks very much for the information this evening. Cheers, everyone.